Hello and welcome to the KPI Institute's webinar, Latest Trends in Performance Improvement Practices. My name is Andrei Kostia and I will be your host for today, along with our presenter, Kristina Mihailoae. This webinar is part of a series of free educational materials that aim to enhance the knowledge and know-how of those interested, while also creating a bridge between us as a company and you, our public. The KPI Institute is a research organization specialized in business performance. It operates research programs in 12 practice domains, each linked to a certification course, ranging from strategy and KPIs to employee performance, and from customer service to innovation performance. The KPI Institute continuously builds on its values of best know-how, data and facts, and common sense to achieve its mission of integrating performance as a discipline through research, publications, and, what interests us today, through educational programs such as this webinar. Today, 14 years after the KPI Institute was created, we can proudly say that our products have reached professionals in 5 continents and that our public comprises a worldwide community of 73,000 members online and 28,000 registered companies on smartkpis.com. Today's webinar will present several trends which relate to how performance data is used in organizations and what professionals consider important to change in order to reach better performance. And it will be delivered by Kristina Mihailoae, Director of Research Programs at the KPI Institute. Kristina's research activity is reflected by her active involvement in developing the book series The KPI Dictionary Volume 1 and 2, as well as reports such as the Top 25 KPI series. She also has experience as a master trainer in delivering best practices in performance measurement through one of the most popular educational programs that we have, the Certified KPI Professional Training course. Kristina's practical experience comes from her involvement as a consultant on various projects, from development or refinement of performance management systems in organizational contexts to conducting performance management audits for organizations across Europe and the Middle East. This presentation lasts roughly 30 minutes. Please feel free to ask any questions you might have during the webinar, as they will be answered at the end of the presentation in our Q&A session. Enjoy the KPI Institute's webinar, Latest Trends in Performance Improvement Practices. Now I would like to invite Kristina to begin her presentation.
Hello everyone, thank you Andrei for the introduction. I'm happy to be here with you the first time for this year. And I've chosen a topic that relates to the first research study that we're going to be releasing in 2018. I don't know if some of you perhaps have attended the previous webinar from last week, where some of the data presented and discussions were also about this the same research study, but on a different topic. So with the release of State of Performance Improvement and KPIs practice in 2017, all the answers were collected for previous years. We're discussing a lot about how can performance be improved. When we're referring to performance improvement from the perspective of the KPI Institute, we analyze processes such as what happens with data after it has been collected, so data analysis, reporting practices, how does the decision-making process take place in the organization, how are improvement initiatives decided upon and the way they get to be implemented, how is learning happening in the company, how can culture support all the activities related to improving performance and bringing the organization to its best. So for today's webinar, I thought we could discuss about KPIs and decision making. That would be like the first thing we need to know, we need to do once we have reporting the performance results. Slightly connected to how we can improve decision making are also some aspects that relate to KPI data management. Who handles data and how is it handled? Another vital element of performance improvement, which has been revealed by not just this research study, but also from our numbers of interactions with practitioners who work in strategy execution and with KPIs. The fact that alignment and integration of KPIs in the company is vital to ensure that we have a sound management system, and also we have set the right path for improvement. So I've selected this as being a separate topic for discussion today. Along with what would be the challenges that most professionals are facing in this stage of improving performance. And I wanted to share with you some improvement suggestions. We ask professionals to share with us what would be the improvement that they would, if they had to name one improvement for their systems, performance management systems right now, what would be the most important improvement that they would add? And I think based on also all of these answers, we managed to draw some very interesting insights in regards to what matters now. And I see it as what matters, what will matter in 2018 as mainstream, what we can do to improve performance. I also wanted to discuss in this webinar about some of the small changes that we can make in order to achieve better performance. I'm sure that there are a lot of initiatives that come straight and directly to our minds when we're thinking how we can improve performance, but most of them probably are linked to having some resources, some heavy resources attached to it, some investment. So I also wanted to discuss about some small things that we could be doing with significant impact and without requiring significant financial investments. I would say that by the end of this webinar, all of us should have some valuable takeaways. And for example, we should be able to see if the KPI data we're generating, is it used at its real potential and how we can improve that. If there's anything we can do to ensure that decision making is more solid in our company. And to see what can you use from some of the recommendations that I'll be giving you in order to optimize the performance levels in your company through optimizing the performance management practices. To start with the first topic on the agenda, meaning the KPIs and the decision-making process. We would like more and more for these two terms to become one, in the sense that as soon as I'm talking about decision making, everyone understands the fact that KPIs, KPI data is an essential part of how we're taking decisions. Before showing and opening the discussion related to how does actually decision making takes place in practice and how much of KPI data is used, I would like to have your opinion on this matter. Andrei, could you share the poll with us? You will have on your screen a poll through which I'm excited to get your insights on your own experience. If it is to think, let's see, can we see it? Okay, if it is to think about your experience, to which extent would you say that when you have to take a decision that relates to work, do you actually get to use concrete data? So you're not basing it on your instinct, on your experience. And honestly, it doesn't count when you say, well, I do have an idea, I do have an estimate of the business in terms of data, so I don't need to particularly check it at that point. So estimates don't count as well. How many of you actually look on concrete data before taking a decision? Okay, you have the poll there, and I think some of you have answered already. I'm just going to take a few more seconds before we can display the results. Okay, I see that most of you, 70% of you voted. Andrei, can you share with us the answers? Well, I'm happy to see that at least in the case of our audience, most of you, to a very high extent, 40% of you are relying on concrete data in taking decisions. Now, the truth is that if we're referring to, let's say, if our research base it's larger than the respondents that we have today, results are quite different. We have asked these questions in our previous surveys as well, and the truth is that there's not a majority of people that can say that they're actually basing decision making based on data. And if we look in the second graph here, which relates to my question, apparently only 22% of respondents are using data on high to very high extent. And there's quite a significant percentage, as 33% of them, that simply rely on, if you want anything, managerial, or to a very small extent on the data that they have at hand. And let's even take, if it is to take the case of people who actually use the data they have, if we're looking at how many of the results that we get to be analyzed in context, not at isolated events, the extent to which we manage to understand very well the correlations between different metrics that or different KPIs that we're analyzing, it seems that an overwhelming percentage, like 45% of professionals, have admitted that in many cases, they simply know what type of data do I need to take the decision, what does it refer to, and they look at maybe one or two KPIs, but they're missing the big picture. So they might be blindsided from certain perspectives because the information that they have at hand is not depicting the full picture of the problem. They might be leading to believe to certain root causes of the problems that are merely symptoms than the real issue. Well, I believe that the best approach to decision, it's not to be at any of the extremes. Although we're living in this, we have been living in the past years with this trend of big data and analytics that to some extent might become overwhelming for all of us. Although we have access to so much data nowadays, it doesn't mean that the decision-making process should be done exclusively on a computer base, if you want, or guided by the KPI results. I think that it's always going to be a matter of combining your expertise as a manager, as a subject matter expert, with what the data actually tells you. And in regards to this, I remember an article I read last year in Harvard Business Review, and it talked about agent-based simulation, or ABS. Agent-based simulation is basically a software that is not necessarily new, even as a concept. It's used to solve complex business problems with a computer by giving you certain simulations of different scenarios. But it has become quite popular in the last years because, for example, this ABS that is promoted by Ecosystems is their product. It has an appealing aspect through the fact that it combines the domain expertise and the data. So it can bring together exactly what I just mentioned, the manager's expertise with actual facts. The domain expertise is used to define the structure of the simulation, and it captures day-to-day behaviors and instructions unique to each business problem. And then the data is used to partly define the details of the simulation and partly to ensure that the simulation runs, the resulting outcomes match the real-world results. And with this approach, they managed to combine the manager expertise, and it has a primary role in how the simulation works, and with the raw data that comes, if you want, like a data scientist or from the computer. It seems to be a very good combination in terms of software used for decision making, and I'm sure it's not the only solution. It was successfully used to simulate the behaviors of sailors in the U.S. Navy, and it was used for recruitment and retirement. And it helped process thousands of data in less than 1 minute and enable a better planning of the workforce. And what was usually used to be processed in 1 year was they were able to do it now in a few minutes. And this is truly remarkable in the sense of what we can do now with technology, but it doesn't mean that it is going to totally replace the expertise and the manager. Because what happens is that with the rise of these very advanced and sophisticated softwares, companies, especially the ones that have the budget to invest in such software solutions, believe that if we have a problem with the decision-making process, well, you just go, you buy a software, you implement it, and it should work out, right? Now, what happens is totally different. You can have the software, but if you don't have the people trained to use that software, if they don't understand what the data tells them, it's going to be useless as well. It's not going to provide any value. And we see in this area of big data more and more the need to train people to become more data literate. And sometimes we have the feeling that, I don't know, all of the managers should have some side or some training on statistics to actually understand, which is totally false. If we're thinking about why isn't data used more often in decision making, since it exists, I was able to identify some of the common issues that might arose here, some possible explanations. In many cases, organizations are facing data quality issues. Professionals complain that although they collect information, they have KPIs in set, they don't have the feeling that data is reliable and accurate. Reasons why they don't fully relate on what the numbers tell them. Sometimes they prefer to take their instinct, their experience, which is in a contradiction with the data because they don't trust the data. In other cases, there's a matter of data availability. It's either not collected, we don't have that information, although we know it's important, or we don't have it in due time. Sometimes we're simply being pressured by time. There's no time to wait for the data to be produced, and I simply need to take actions. In other cases, we can talk about habit. Not everyone is used with using KPIs, with using data. Some of us, especially if we're talking perhaps at more senior managers that we might have in the company, they rely a lot on their experience. And not lastly, it is a matter of competency. We might simply not know how to make use of all of the information we have. We might not know how to find the most important information from all of the data that we have at hand. We might not know how to question it. If we don't know how that KPI, for example, was calculated, it's going to be very hard to find some root causes of problems or to understand how a certain number, how a certain performance level was generated, and so on. In terms of data quality issues and data availability, obviously that if you're talking about a software solution, it's going to help on both sides. It's going to give you reliable data and it's going to give it to you in due time. And I think Gartner forecasted that for 2017, the business analytics and the market, the business analytics market is going to grow to $18.3 billion in 2017. And we're still expecting growth for the future 3 years in terms of usage and interest for business intelligence from large corporations, since there's an increased need for better agility, accessibility, and deeper insights. And this is all great. We can, as I previously said, we can go and buy a software solution. But if we're having questions with questioning, if we're questioning data quality in our company, there's easier solutions that we can access as well. Because one of the things that a software implementation does is to bring clarity on your processes. So before you can implement that software and make it functional, You're going to have a team of consultants that are going to work on process mapping. They need to understand exactly from where the data is coming, who is producing it, and all the details needed to make the configurations. In some organizations, these processes don't exist. And this process mapping doesn't exist, or if it is, it hasn't been updated in ages. And it's the same problem that the same issue can fix our data quality, in the sense that we don't have to have a software implementation project to start thinking about mapping better our processes, mapping it at least in terms of KPI data collection, knowing from where the information is coming, who is providing it, how are we going to calculate it, and questioning how relevant is that calculation for our decision process. If we get this straight, then we can manage to standardize the way KPIs are calculated, the way data is gathered, and we can create an internal system that is streamlined and doesn't rely on software. It can rely on Microsoft processing data in Microsoft Excel. Yes, it will not be as time efficient as a software solution, but it can help you definitely when improving data accuracy. And in terms of reporting on time, if you have a good schedule and the right people assigned, you can even improve in terms of having some minimum data available on a monthly basis. Regarding to other reasons that might justify the reduced usage of data in decision making, such as time pressure, habit, or competency, I wanted to make a point simply about related to competency. We might have the impression that being let's say having a high level of data literacy as managers means that we need to know some advanced statistics. But the truth is that University of Washington performed a study last year because they wanted to identify, as they saw that data literacy becomes a key competency, they're thinking about how are we going to teach students into getting these skills before they enter in the marketplace. So in their analysis, they actually identified that the vast majority of what it's called today analytics and it's used in business, meaning 80% of this analytics are simply sums and averages. So we're not talking about mastering some very complicated statistical analysis. We're talking simply about basic math. But what we need to understand, or what our managers need to understand, is the fact that they need to look better into how those KPIs are calculated, how data is collected. They need to have more insights into this process, even though they're not the ones that execute them. They're simply the data users, if you want. And if we're talking about the process itself on how we can make decision making easier and more oriented towards data, I would think about a six steps process. Regardless of the problem that I have, I would firstly think about strategy. I will have to link it to strategy. How is this connected? How does it affect my strategy? Then I would think about potential causes. What can be potential causes? Afterwards, I would try to identify what data actually depicts the problem and its possible solutions. So what data backs up my assumptions or doesn't, or point out the opposite. The fourth step is to find several solutions. The fifth is to think about the impact, and nonetheless, in the end, you choose the best option. But my point is that in this process of decision making, you should try to always connect the problem with strategy, impact on strategy, with the KPIs, with the data that pinpoints the problem, and also, do I have the data to support some of the root cause problems that I'm guessing might be linked to this issue? This is how you connected strategy and KPIs to decision making. Another topic that I've just slightly touched before relates to data management, who and how. Data management, or KPI data management. As I've just mentioned, if we want managers to be more we wanted to be able to integrate data into decision making, they should understand more about the data that they're working with. And here might be a differentiation between the fact that data custodians might know more about the data than KPI owners, because data custodians are the ones that collect the information, that create the reports, that do all of the calculations. They might even be more data oriented than, professionally talking, than all of the KPI owners, who are basically people with managerial positions in the position of making decisions. We have to bring these two sides working together better. The KPI owner receives the report and has to take action, but it has to have a minimum understanding of that data so that it doesn't get side-blinded by numbers. Sometimes the numbers might be very, very misleading. So if a data custodian actually wants to make sure that you're missing out on an aspect, it can be done very easily through the reporting that it's being done, if the KPI owner doesn't know to ask the right questions. Regarding who manages data and KPIs, we've also seen in our past annual researches that more and more there's a raise, there's a rising of a new office, the Strategy and Performance Management Office, which is responsible with managing everything that relates to corporate performance, and this is the department that is going to set the standards related to how is performance measurement done, how is data collected, who is in charge of each step of the process, what are the best KPIs for us, and so on. But what we can see here is that even in this situation, in which we've seen more and more this department as being part of organizations, and then of course we're talking about large organizations that have the resources and for whom it makes sense to have a dedicated team, there is a percentage of 11% of companies that have no dedicated person or department. And in most of cases, data is handled by the financing and accounting department. A lot of it goes also in relation to commercial, such as marketing and maybe internal control and audit. Or HR, who is also a stakeholder that has quite reporting to do. 11% of companies don't have a dedicated department or a person, which means that this responsibility of handling data seems to be everyone's job, but no one in particular. And I agree, it is everyone's job to basically make sure that the information that is needed for their role, to fulfill their role at the best, is under their strict monitoring. But what happens in this context is that you develop silos, you develop different types, different practices of measuring and reporting. And then it gets harder to ensure that data is accurate. It gets harder when you're trying to take decisions, because decisions can have different impacts in different areas. The same decision can have a different impact in different areas of the organization. But since we're using different measurement tools and we're reporting on different things, it might be very hard to put all data together and make sense of what's actually going to happen. So this is why having a person, or at least if you want on a project-based term, a person allocated to standardize how do we handle data in this company and KPI measurement, it will impose a common standard, so at any time data is reliable regardless of the source from where it comes and who produced it. And in terms of as I've mentioned, the fact that data quality is one of the top 3 challenges in managing performance. And we've seen this from the research study that we do. We've also seen it through our interactions during training courses. We trained in performance measurement more than 2,000 professionals in the past years, and they're coming from different types of organizations, large organizations, small organizations, private sector, public sector, from Europe, from Africa, from Middle East, from US or Australia. So they're coming all over the place. But when we're discussing with participants and we try to see what are the challenges that you're facing, data quality is outlined. And taking it statistically talking, it ranks in top 3 challenges in managing, or if you want, in measuring performance. The research we did last year points out that almost 60% of our respondents still rely on Microsoft Office. And probably if we count them, we have 35 of them do rely on a software solution. But still, the majority looks into managing performance through the usage of Microsoft Office. And this even more in the lack of standardized processes and procedures leads to more room for errors. Another topic that I wanted to touch today was related to alignment and integration. Before going further, I would like to clarify from my perspective, what do I understand through alignment and how is that different from integration? When I say KPI alignment, I'm thinking about how do we ensure that strategy is linked to KPIs, and then strategy and KPIs are cascaded throughout the entire organization. So whether we're talking about corporate, departmental, and individual, from top to the bottom, there's clear alignment, they're connected. Whether we're talking between different departments, they're aligned, they are working towards the same purposes. Integration, on the other hand, I'm thinking, when I say integration, I'm thinking about how do KPIs integrate with other key processes in the organization. KPIs are basically tools which are used in quality management, for example, which can be used in project management, which are used in strategy, in measuring corporate strategy. Then we have the budgeting process, which is closely tied to strategy. So there are several key processes in the organization that help the organizations work better, and how does performance management as a process and KPIs is integrated with these others, and how important it is for them to be in that manner, to be integrated. Related to alignment, we usually analyze the extent of alignment between the corporate strategy and departments, but then also between corporate strategy and employee plans. And what we have seen for the past 3 years, because we're doing this research study every year since 2015, is the fact that always there is less alignment from corporate to employee level compared to departmental level. In the most recent figures that we've gathered, it seems like in terms of organizational or corporate strategy versus departmental, 40% of professionals feel like there is strong alignment. However, strong alignment seems to be common when we're talking about corporate versus employee, only in 29% of this organization. And I would say the results are not surprisingly, because if you've ever tried to create this alignment, if you were ever faced with employee appraisals, you know for sure from your experience that it's much harder to connect the role of each and every individual in a company to the big strategy compared to connecting the corporate strategy to the HR strategy, to the financial or the procurement, production, marketing, and so on. KPI alignment ensures that the organization works as a system. It can lead to eliminating inefficiencies, and it has an important impact in decision making, because if your KPIs are aligned, then it means that the set of KPIs you're tracking, the scorecard on which you're looking at the moment, has considered the implications of other departments as well, and you're able to have access to data that gives you the full picture and you don't have this tunnel perspective on how things are going. In terms of integration, we wanted to see from some of the important processes in the company, which one of them are considered by respondents to be the most integrated with the KPI measurement. And first, obviously, budgeting. It's not new for most of you that when you're doing strategy, it's always linked to budgeting. And even though it's something we all know, there's still many discussions about how can we better link them together, these processes, so that they don't happen independently of each other. And then once both are ready, we have the strategy and we have the budget for the year, they don't seem to match. But still, being, let's say, as old as time, it is one of the most well integrated processes with KPIs. The second one is quality management, probably because of the high usage of KPIs in quality management and process management. And the third position, as I said, process management. These are all areas in which KPIs are used. People working in this, close to these processes, know how to use data and metrics. Therefore, seem to be the most integrated. At the opposite spectrum, there are other three processes that seem to be a bit disconnected with what's happening in terms of KPI measurement. The first position is innovation. Well, we all want innovative employees. We all want an innovative working environment. However, it seems like when it comes to connecting KPIs to innovation, there's not much actually to connect. The second position, risk management, which I would say that to some extent it's an alarming signal. As tight as budgeting it is to strategy, I consider risk management should be to strategy as well. We cannot strategize if we're not thinking about the risks that we're going to face and how we handle that. And we also use the idea of key risk indicators in our KPI frameworks. So there should be a better alignment achieved there as well. And the third position, project management and KPI usage. I would say that KPI usage and project management might be more popular for companies that operate project-based, maybe in the IT industry, maybe for governmental entities that have large-scale projects to implement, and therefore they have a connection with KPIs. To conclude on this topic, I would say that all of these six processes are important and should be part of an integrated performance management system. We should think about how we can link it and to what level. So I would say that this is maybe a homework for you to think about how you can improve it and how you can make sure that the KPI framework that you have actually gets to be connected there. And if innovation is important for you, then how can you link it through KPIs to strategy? How can we link risks, and how can we do project management in such a way that data is used there as well? And on the other hand, I think it can be a different webinar in which we can discuss in more details about practical examples to connect these processes. In terms of what yes, Andre?
I just wanted to mention if you could in any way...
Yes, I know. I have 15 more minutes.
Yeah.
Yes, I've just noticed. Thank you for the timing, for pointing out the timing. Okay, so I have 15 more minutes and I have 2 more topics to discuss. I will try to be brief. The challenges in improving performance, the challenges that were pointed out by our audience, reflect on, it is hard, let's say on a scale from 1 to 5, where 1 is easy, 5 is very hard. It is quite hard, quite difficult to define and to nurture a performance culture. Secondly, ranked is refers to the difficulty in implementing performance improvement initiatives. And what I can say from my experience is that you do the list with the improvement initiatives, but in terms of executing and following up on the execution of those items, that's where the difficulty comes. And basically because there is no follow-up process and things are not clearly mapped and monitored. Third position, decision making. Fourth, data analysis. We're not going to get into more details on this. Fifth, how do we learn from performance management? And the last one, how can we improve reporting? In terms of how can we learn from performance results, it's again like with the implementation of projects and improvement initiatives, you need to have a process that maps how do you do the follow-up and how do you get people to talk about what happened and to create a collective experience, a collective intelligence of the organization. And what I wanted to share with you are the improvement suggestions, and I will close with this in relation to each. I can give you some insights of what can we actually do. These improvement suggestions came as an open question for respondents in which they could share one improvement. If you were to mention one, which one would it be for your performance management system to improve the performance in your organization? And based on the data that we have collected, I have here 4 categories, the 4 most mentioned improvement suggestions. So the first one, most commonly mentioned by respondents, by professionals, relates to alignment. How do we set strategy and we align our KPIs to the strategy? How do we cascade strategy? How do we develop a performance management system that is aligned to departmental goals? How do we link employees to corporate goals? Now, in terms of small improvements, if we were to take the case of a company that has KPIs, so here we're talking about improving what we have. It's not starting from scratch because that would be, let's say, a bit easier to some extent because we can have an entire methodology of how to implement a performance management system on a balanced scorecard. But if we are to talk about how we can improve alignment of what we have right now, I would suggest to take the time to analyze the KPIs that are reported by your department. Let's talk firstly about horizontal alignment because that might be more complicated than the vertical one. Horizontal alignment between departments. Take all the KPIs, take the scorecards of these departments and analyze them together with your targets. Are they linked together? Do they make sense? And from this perspective, think about this. If I have the marketing department and the marketing department tells us that for the customer satisfaction, which is strategically of strategic importance for us, the most important time is for the product to be on time. It's not a quality, it's not the features, it needs to be on time. Now, if marketing says that on time is important for customer satisfaction, then automatically logistics as a division should have very clearly in its scorecard that delivery times or on-time delivery is key for us. We must focus on that. And that delivery target should be correlated with what the client considers to be actually acceptable or expected. If logistics is focused on delivering on time, then production, you should make sure that production is not too focused on the quality of the product or on research and development. If for a client and for logistics, it's important to be on time, production should have a close monitoring on cycle times, which should be correlated with the delivery time. So in this manner, if you take all the departments that you have and you identify the key processes and how they're contributing to the process and how does that process impact the customer, because in the end, it's about the customer, you might be able to identify that some of the KPIs or the targets associated with the KPIs are conflicting, are not leading it towards the same perspective, towards the same corporate strategy. And in terms of linking it down to employee level, look on how everyday work is connected to what you have set as an expectation for the employee. That's the first point of misalignment. They're doing something at work every day. There's something else written in the appraisal as being performance criteria or as being their objectives. And then the second point is, are those objectives connected to what the company wants to achieve? Ranking second in the improvement suggestions is automation. We want to integrate all KPI measurement system and fully automate it. We would need to use a dedicated software for data collection. We would give priority to automation. We should be introducing a performance management software. I'm not going to go into more details on this topic because I've already mentioned before. If you don't have the budget to buy the software, start with process streamlining, meaning map the processes and how data is collected. Make sure they are lean. Make sure you standardize. Everyone has to be using the same templates, the same processes to collect data, and you can create this entire system simply using Microsoft Excel. Ranking third, knowledge and skills. Many professionals feel like there's not sufficient basic education about performance management in their company. There's no sufficient awareness on how to work with KPIs. And then again, awareness of the importance of KPIs, training of staff who will be responsible for corporate performance management, greater education of lower level staff. Besides training courses that you can access from external facilitators, the Certified KPI Professional Training course that we're offering, there are also some internal trainings that you can deliver, some presentations. You can use some of the variety of free materials that the KPI Institute offers, materials like these webinars. We have previews of many of the research studies that we're doing. We have top 10 KPIs, which are for free. You can have 1, 2, 3 champions, KPI champions in the company that can improve their knowledge even through some free materials available in this area, and they can forward share it with their colleagues and slowly increase the knowledge level within the organization. And last but not last, culture and communication. Greater transparency among lower staff, getting employees of the company's strategic plan, better communication, communication again, transparency and engagement. It seems like we talk about communication, we talk a lot in general, but without much effect or without being effective in our process. We should increase the communication with our employees in terms of what is our strategy, what are we going to do, as well in how well are we performing. This can be done by setting up a communication plan, internal and external, if you have this external communication part of your strategy or interests. If not internally, we need to establish who are our stakeholders, stakeholder category, and what type of information they should be aware in terms of strategy and performance results. And if you once done the annual strategic planning session, you can communicate it to everyone in the sense and in a way that it's understandable. And obviously, it highlights what is of interest for the audience that you're communicating with. But once this is communicated, you can have quarterly information in the format of newsletter that you internal newsletter sent, or distribution of online content that informs people on how well the company is doing. At departmental level, you can inform people on what is their contribution to the projects that are going to take place, how they can contribute, what is the status of that project, and so on. But we for sure need more communication to increase transparency in what the company wants to achieve and what does it mean for each employee. And it's up to each manager, each team leader to translate to the lowest level, so that everyone understands what they have to do and how they can do it. And with this, I would like to close today's webinar. I think we'll still have 5 minutes for questions, so we can take maybe 1 or 2 questions. As takeaways, I would think about these 4 improvements that I find relevant, and I'm sure that maybe if we get a chance to discuss here, you would have other ideas as well. But in relation to how we can improve integration and alignment, consider to create a map of the KPIs that you're already using, especially at horizontal level, and see how they interact with each other, see how departments get to support each other through the KPIs to deliver the final product, the final service that the customer expects. In terms of automation, when the software solution might not be feasible, and in some cases might not even be needed for small companies, We can talk about process streamlining and mapping, standardization of tools used, and Excel. In terms of knowledge and skills, again, if going to external trainings is not an option, then create KPI champions within the company that can increase their knowledge of information on this topic because they're passionate about through a variety of materials that you can find on our platform as well, and they can further distribute and disseminate knowledge in the company. In relation to culture and communication, I would start with a strategy and performance management communication plan to know exactly what are we going to communicate, to whom, by when, and make sure that they know both what is our strategy for this year and how are we performing, at least on a quarterly basis. Well, with this, I will close my presentation. I would like to let you know that the research study that from which I've taken out all of the findings I've discussed about today will be released in March, and we will be offering it for free to all of the participants for this webinar. So as soon as it's ready this next month, actually, you're going to receive it by email. I thank you for your participation. And Andrei, do we have any questions?
Yes, so we've received a couple of questions. So the first one would be, in your opinion, who should be trained in measuring KPIs? This is usually done at the top management level, but the attendee would like to know if this is enough.
Yes, I think that's the common perception that training on KPIs, training on strategies is a matter of C-suite, if you want, of senior management, top management in companies. And I'm not saying it isn't, but if we're talking about having more knowledge in the company, sometimes simply training this small pool of people is not enough. There are training courses related to KPIs that are dedicated, or if you want, there are training courses related to strategy management, which are dedicated to senior management. And to give you an example, we have the Certified Strategy and Business Planning Professional Training course, which as an audience, it is for this small pool of people. We have the Certified KPI Professional Training course, which is suitable for top management, but it's also easily adaptable for people that are middle or lower management, and that will be very useful for them. So this content, this discussion about training on KPI can be done very high level, but can be done also in a more restrictive way so that it touches simply the topics that are of interest for most of the employees, if you want, for the operational aspects of working with KPIs. So I wouldn't say it's a niche and dedicated only for top management. Knowing the basis of how to work with KPIs is something that it is valuable nowadays for any type of position in the organization, from the perspective that in some cases you might be on a managerial position, in others you might be in the position in which you have to work with data, and it's very important if you understand how that data is being used by the client to whom you're providing the information.
All right, thank you very much. And in the meantime, we've received a few other questions. So could you very briefly give us an example of a KPI that is applied to innovation, an innovation KPI basically? What would be the unit of measurement for it?
I think that this question relies to what I've said earlier about integrating. So how do we integrate the innovation process in the company with the KPI framework? My point with that in a practical example is that if innovation is a value driver for your company and it is highly important for the success of the business, then it should appear in your strategy map. You should have a strategic team that is dedicated to innovation. And how do you translate this strategic team into measurement? It is by setting up KPIs, such as, from a simplistic perspective, you can be looking at how much how many ideas, how many improvement ideas, how many innovative ideas are produced by your team, and then you can aggregate it at the company level. Now, whether this KPI, like a number of ideas produced per aggregated per month or per quarter, simply shows the qualitative side of innovation, you can link it to another KPI that shows the extent to which those ideas are valuable for the company and how you're maximizing actually all this effort of involving people into giving ideas by measuring the percentage of innovation ideas proposed and approved, implemented. It's very also here is also important because depending on the context, you must decide what innovation means. Are we talking about innovation in terms of creating innovative products and services for the clients? Or sometimes innovation might simply mean process optimization within the company. So regardless of which approach you might take, the KPIs might be slightly different. But in the, let's say, more common sense, we want to be more innovative, we want to work smarter and constantly improve the way we're working in the company. You can be tracking some improvement ideas that employees are giving in relation to processes and how much of those processes are actually implemented. And I do know some companies, large companies that have, such as Bosch, for example, that on the appraisal of their employees, each employee has a KPI which is called CPU or something, continuous process improvement ideas. So their performance is connected also to how much they are engaged in spotting inefficiencies and providing some suggestions to fix them.
Thank you very much for your answer. And now, one last question. Can you give us any examples of, in your opinion, good and cost-effective software available in the market for KPI automation?
Yes, I can give you some examples. Now, the point is that good and cost-effective are subjective. So it depends a lot on what is cost-effective from one company might be extremely expensive for another one. And what is good, it depends on the specifications. What do you need that software to do? Is it just for corporate level? Is it just for employees? Is it for everything from corporate down to employee? So from this perspective, I think we have the contact, right, of the person who asked the questions, and I can give you some examples from different cases in writing.
Thank you once again for your answers, and this brings us to the end of our webinar. Christina, do you have any last words for our listeners?
No, thank you very much for listening. I hope you have a great year and that performance increases in your professional and personal lives on a daily basis.
Thank you once again for your presentation. The KPI Institute appreciates your interest in the webinar Latest Trends in Performance Improvement Practices. Follow our websites and our social media channels to find out more details about our next webinars when they get posted. Also, if you are interested in getting a certification granted by the KPI Institute on vital areas within the performance management discipline, you can explore our scheduled courses on marketplace.kpiinstitute.org. Thank you once again for your participation and have a nice day.